I'm Katie Jefferies, and this year on Unsolved, we have covered cases spanning the First Coast, from a robbery and murder nearly 50 years ago to a hit and run that took the life of a young mother. A case we covered in May, a Ware County baby Jane Doe, has since been identified, and 2 people are facing charges in her death. But the rest of the cases you're about to see remain open. Here is Unsolved 2023. St. Augustine police don't believe this was a murder or that any foul play was involved. But a man died, and after months of work, he remains unidentified. But they do have a description, a picture, and items found at a campsite, and they're hoping someone in the public can connect the dots so the man's family can be notified. The banks of the San Sebastian can be a peaceful place. But in the afternoon hours of August 6th of last year, a kayaker made a gruesome discovery: a body floating near the State Road 16 bridge. Investigators say the man had been in the water for days, making him unrecognizable. He had no identification on him either. But in speaking with local business owners, they caught a break in the case.
We had one individual who was able to provide us with a picture of someone who fit his description.
A marina owner snapped this picture of a man in a canoe. It was taken in June, about 6 weeks before the man's body was found. Zooming in, you can't see the man's face, but you can see his leg, a fishing pole, and some of the items in the canoe.
We found some of the items that we've been able to identify in the canoe in a local campsite. So we think the subject was actually camping on a little remote island that's in the San Sebastian River.
The island seen here, not far from where his body was eventually found. On the island, the police report notes a blue beanbag was found, which they believe to be the same one seen in the picture of the canoe. Also noted a wooden Swiss Army knife with the name David was on it at the campsite as well. His canoe was spotted overturned on the banks of the river.
And we've talked to all the homeless camps in the area. We've been to the homeless shelters. We've talked to numerous different residents who live around the area, people that live in the woods close to this area, and nobody recognizes him.
They say the best description they can give right now of the man in the canoe is a white male, aged 20 to 40, about 5'7", no tattoos, but 2 gold teeth near the front of his mouth. Sergeant Carroll says while they have collected DNA from him and added it to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons database, the line to get an unidentified person's DNA tested through NamUs is very long. But recently, Sergeant Carroll says FDLE has taken the DNA to be tested as well.
They have accepted DNA from the body, and they are going to test it and see if they can find anything, but not everybody's DNA is on file or in a database.
Whether it be through DNA or someone recognizing the details in this story, they just want to answer the question, who is this man in the canoe? If you think you can help identify the man in the canoe, please contact the St. Augustine Police Department. It can help close this case and, most importantly, let the man's family know what happened. Katie Jefferies, First Coast News, on your side. Going through old newspapers is like a trip back in time, the old headlines, stories, and crimes. But with time, things can be forgotten, which is why a group of volunteers is going through the newspapers day by day to find the forgotten. On microfilm, in the harsh black and white, stories emerge. Stories of local crimes and missing people. And though ink can fade, one cold case advocate wants to make sure the memories of these cases don't.
We were originally just supposed to be a podcast, just a simple podcast made by a guy who was interested in the local cases. And it turned into something a lot bigger than that.
Jason Futch with Swanee Valley Unsolved says as he researched and created a podcast about local unsolved murders, it ignited a passion in him. And when the University of Florida converted decades worth of microfilm of the Lake City Reporter newspaper into online editions, he had an idea.
Basically documenting every homicide case that has happened since probably 1967.
He and a group of around 10 volunteers have been working through the newspapers day by day, documenting every homicide or missing persons case.
To make sure that these cases have been followed up on, that there has been a successful prosecution in it, and if we can't find a successful resolution to these cases, We want to know why.
And so far, Futch says law enforcement has been receptive. Greg Burnson with the Lake City Police Department says he speaks frequently with Futch about the cases the project has uncovered, and it has been beneficial.
It has stirred interest for us to pull these cases out and take a look at them. Technology's changed so much, so we're trying to get slow to go through these cases and resubmit evidence.
In some instances, Futch and the volunteers have found cases whose files have seemingly disappeared, like the case of Leroy Mills, missing since March 22nd of 1988. He was last seen leaving his home in Lake City. 2 days later, his wallet was found in a dumpster behind a saloon on US 441. The articles describe a massive search and even a task force, but he was never found.
So I went down, tried to find any paper records and could find nothing. No record, no case number to find.
He was eventually able to find a listing for an evidence entry under Mills' name, which had a case number. But what he found was disappointing.
There was a case file with literally 6 pages.
Just a report that Mills was entered into the National Crime Information Center as a missing person. And an odd note.
And then there was a sticky note attached to one of those pages where he was removed per FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, during an audit.
Why Mills' name was removed from the system, investigator Burnson doesn't know. But he says the articles Futch and the volunteers have found have been helpful in piecing this case back together. The articles contain the names of the original investigators, giving him leads to track down the missing case file and hopefully reopen this case.
We just have to run down that one investigator that still has the case file so we can move forward.
The renewed interest in Leroy Mills' case is welcome news to his surviving family members, who have had so many questions over the last 35 years.
We never understood what had really happened. And right now today, I still don't know what happened.
They say Leroy was a kind man who loved spending time with his family, and they just want to know what happened.
And I will never understand why this happened to him. The world needs more people like Leroy was.
Burns had said he is interested in reinvestigating the case and is grateful for the work Futch and the project's volunteers are doing.
It's gonna help, and I'm glad he's doing this.
If you know anything about the disappearance of Leroy Mills, please contact the Lake City Police Department. If you're interested in volunteering with the Swanee Valley Unsolved Newspaper Project, you can find contact information inside this story on firstcoastnews.com. Katie Jefferies, First Coast News, on your side. It's been nearly 9 years since Charles Adams was last seen alive, and though his body has never been found, investigators believe he was murdered. But with the original scene now torn down, it creates challenges for investigators. But in this case, they say, they do have a person of interest. On a warm June day in 2014, a friend of Charles Adams walked into the Putnam County Sheriff's Office to make a report.
That nobody had seen Charles Adams in several months. It had been 2 or 3 months at the time.
Though the 64-year-old lived primarily in Hawaii, he traveled often back to the area to check in on the 2 mobile home parks he owned, one in Camden County, Georgia, the other in Interlochen in Putnam County. And suddenly, nobody could reach him. Detectives went to the Cooper Lake Mobile Home Park and found their first red flag.
Go out there and they inspect the office afterwards. They find a little bit of blood spatter in there, which was unusual. They couldn't really explain it.
And a resident told them they had suspicions about a man who did handiwork around the mobile home park in 2014 and was often seen with Charles.
The day before he went missing is when arguments are heard between the groundskeeper and Charles, and it's at that front office.
And residents at both of Charles' mobile home parks told detectives the groundskeeper had told them he would now be collecting the rent instead of Charles. We are not releasing the name of the groundskeeper at this time because the Putnam County Sheriff's Office says it could hinder their investigation. Also, he has not been charged in connection to Charles' disappearance. But Detective Usina says he is a suspect.
Certainly suspect he has some involvement or at least some information.
Charles' family says when they arrived at Cooper's Lake to search for him, they heard a similar story. They asked that their names and faces not be shown out of fear for their own safety.
Everybody in the mobile home park came running out going, Charles got killed, and we think it was.
Though detectives had leads, Charles nor his body was ever found, and the case went cold. Detective Usina was brought on in 2020 and says it has been challenging with the original scene and blood spatter now gone.
Trailer park's since been completely refurbished and been redone, has new owners. That office has long since been torn down, so we can't even really go back and inspect that original scene.
He also tried excavations in different areas, but found nothing. Charles' family says it has been devastating for them. There isn't a day they don't think about him. They say that Charles was friendly, outgoing, and gave people chances. And they think that kindness is what got him killed.
He just took for granted that if you treat people nice, they treat you back nice. And then he ended up with this guy who murdered him.
Detective Usina says while the passage of time has taken away possible evidence, he hopes it will give those with information the courage to come forward now so they can pursue what happened to Charles Adams.
That can stir up some of those memories that give us something to look into and start digging up new leads, because the leads and the information that has been looked at over the last 8.5 years has not got us there.
If you know anything about the disappearance and likely death of Charles Adams, please contact the Putnam County Sheriff's Office. Katie Jefferies, First Coast News, on your side. She is case number 754-93 at the Flagler County Sheriff's Office, a Jane Doe whose identity has remained unknown for more than 3 decades. With genetic genealogy, they've been able to determine her ancestors, but narrowing down the family tree from there has been a challenge. And before investigators can look into her murder, they need to know, who is she? It was a normal afternoon in 1993. 2 young boys were playing basketball at the end of their cul-de-sac on Seaship Place when the ball bounced into the woods near their home. They went after it, but what they found was terrifying. A dead body, down to just skeletal remains. Detectives from the Flagler County Sheriff's Office responded.
They determined that she was Native American, between 25 and 35 years old at the time of her death, and was there between 2 and 3 years.
Detective Sarah Scalia with the Flagler County Sheriff's Office says the initial investigators went through missing persons reports but didn't find any that matched. And that could be because her race was unclear. The first detective said she was Native American, but the medical examiner's report states she is white. But more recently, DNA testing has revealed both were wrong. She was actually African American. She died from blunt force trauma to the head. And to investigate her murder, detectives first need to know who she was.
That's step 1. We have to identify her to know what happened to her.
This was the first facial recreation done in 1993. Detective Scalia says while it was done with good intentions, it isn't very accurate. So in reopening this case, the Flagler County Sheriff's Office asked one of the premier forensic artists in Florida, Autumn Crick, with the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office to help with a new recreation using the information they had from DNA and the original skull. This, investigators believe, is a better representation of what she may have looked like. With still no leads on who she could be, Detective Scalia says she turned to genetic genealogy. And there, the trail started to heat up. DNA says she is a descendant of George Washington Coleman and Clarissa Minnick. The couple lived in the late 1800s.
And then from there, we're going down the tree. So Clarissa and George had 12 children. Their 12 children had multiple children. So the branches of the tree are all over the place, spread out.
Most of the Coleman-Minnick family are in the Aiken and Edgefield, South Carolina area, but some have branched out to Florida. Detective Scalia says the members of the family have been cooperative. She's been working with Danya Williams, a member of the Coleman-Minnick family and a co-owner of Genealogy Adventures, to help build out the family tree of more than 300 descendants and to see if anyone recognizes this woman.
They don't know. They just simply don't know. The ones that we've spoken to, they have absolutely no idea who she is.
Williams says her focus is on figuring out who the parents could be, which she thinks will then unlock the woman's identity.
But we're really focused on the grands, that is her parents, so they're born between the 30s and the 40s.
It is unknown if she lived in Florida or if her body was just dumped here. But considering she's believed to be between 20 to 35 years old when she died in 1993, Detective Scalia and Danya Williams say she had a life, friends, maybe connections to family. Someone has to know who she is.
We want her to put her to rest properly, and she wants to be found. Her ancestors want her to be found, and I think that it should be done.
For now, her body remains at the medical examiner's office in Flagler County, waiting for the day she finally gets her name restored, and then the investigation into her murder can begin.
I want to reconnect her with her family in whatever way I can do that, and then give the family some kind of resolution.
If you have any information in this case, you're asked to contact the Flagler County Sheriff's Office. Katie Jefferies, First Coast News, on your side. It's a crime that makes Jacksonville seem like the wild, wild west. An ambush, an attempted robbery, a shootout in the middle of Beach Boulevard, and a hero trying to protect others. It's been more than 50 years since George Schwinder was murdered, and his wife and 6 children are hoping that now is finally the time they get answers. In the files of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, you will find a weathered brown folder marked homicide. Case number 96750.
Looking back through our case history and researching, I don't see anything like this ever that's happened in our history.
It began like a normal day, June 17, 1970. 43-year-old George Schwinder and 31-year-old Harry Shank arrived at the Zayres department store on Beach Boulevard in their Brinks armored truck to pick up a cash deposit. Schwinder stayed in the truck, and as Shank walked out of the store carrying the money, witnesses say bullets started flying.
He's coming out of the store, and 2 gunmen opened fire on him.
Harry Shank was shot, returning fire as he stumbled back into the store. George Schwinder opened the truck door and began firing at the attackers to try and protect his partner, but he was struck multiple times. The gunman jumped into a getaway car parked in the lot with the driver and took off, leaving the money and a horrific scene. Bullet holes piercing the front door of Zayres and the side of the Brinks truck. Harry Shank lay bleeding inside the store. George Schwinder also wounded inside the cab of the truck. Shank would survive the attack, but George Schwinder, a husband and father of 6, died.
He's just a family man, and he's gunned down in broad daylight for some people who wanted to take some money.
The getaway car, a 1961 white Buick, was found less than a mile away on Cortez Road. There was some debate about a description of the attackers, but investigators now say it appears to have been 2 white males as the shooters and a woman as a getaway driver. All were described as young, likely in their 20s at the time. George Schwinder's children say that day is burned into their memories. His oldest child heard the news alert come across the radio.
And they said there's been a robbery of a Brinks truck in town. And that's all they said. More details to follow. And we kind of looked at each other and we said, Dad's on an in-town run today, isn't he?
They had a bad feeling that was confirmed when their father's boss arrived at their home to tell their mother the news. The World War II veteran, husband, and father who coached their baseball teams and adored his children was gone.
Would do anything for you or help you out in anything you need. Just a great guy all around.
The story went nationwide and a search ensued. About a week and a half later, an arrest was made. 23-year-old Charles Catton of Jacksonville, arrested and charged with murder after newspaper reports say he sought medical attention for a bullet wound to the arm. And a witness ID'd him as one of the shooters at Zare's. He was also on parole after serving 2.5 years on a bank robbery charge. But newspaper reports show a co-worker testified he worked with Catton the day of the robbery, and witnesses described the man who shot George Schwinder as having hair that stuck out beneath his straw hat. Those testifying on Catton's behalf said he had shaved his head about 6 weeks prior to the robbery. In the end, the grand jury did not indict Catton for the murder. And there has never been another arrest since.
But currently, as of right now, we do not have a suspect in custody on this case.
But detectives are not out of leads. They still have some of the evidence from the scene, including a straw hat witnesses say one of the gunmen wore and fell off his head as he was running back to the getaway car. In the hat, a single hair, but no follicle, so no DNA for right now. Investigators say, though, they are holding on to it because technology is quickly progressing and they hope to be able to test it soon. Until then, George Schwinder's children and wife remember his heroic actions trying to save his partner and other innocent lives that day. And they hope someday there will be answers about who took his life.
Thinking like maybe one day they'll find him, but that day's never come still today.
I did speak with the daughter of Harry Shank, who tells me that though he did survive that day, the blood transfusions he was given were tainted with hepatitis C, which would lead to complications throughout his life and his eventual death in 2006. And they, too, are praying for answers in this case. If you know anything about the Brinks armored truck robbery in Jacksonville in 1970, please call the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. Katie Jefferies, First Coast News, on your side. Investigators say Emanuel Lewis was not the target, and yet he was the one who was killed in a drive-by shooting in December of last year, leaving behind a devastated mother, siblings, and 2 children. And to add to the pain, investigators and families say people know who did this. They just aren't talking. It began like any average day, December 15th, 2022. 27-year-old Emanuel Lewis was chatting with 2 friends in the driveway of a home he shared with his girlfriend in Lake City when a small gray SUV approached.
Circled the block at one time and then drove up and started shooting.
Investigator Greg Burnson with the Lake City Police Department got the call to respond to the shooting.
Officers arrived. They located 3 individuals who had been shot. 1 was deceased at the scene, 2 others were transported to the hospital for their injuries.
Emanuel Lewis was dead, but Burnson said he believes the real target were the 2 friends, and they would recover from their injuries, but so far have not helped the investigation.
To put it blunt, they have not been helpful at all. We feel they know exactly who it was.
And that is deeply painful for Lewis's mother, Maycherelle McCrae.
I don't have no hatred in my heart. I'm angry, yes. I'm sad. My family is sad. We're sad. We're hurt.
She says her son was devoted to his 7-year-old son and excited to welcome another child, born not long after his death. McCrae says her heart hurts that his children won't have him as they grow up, and as a mother, she will never see him or hear his voice again.
Mama, you all right? Are you good? Yes, I'm okay. You all right? Yes, ma'am. I love you, Mama. Okay. I'm not going to hear that. No, I'm not going to hear that. I'm not going to have that conversation anymore. I'm not going to hear those words anymore.
Investigator Burnson says while they are working this murder, physical evidence is not going to solve every case. They need community cooperation.
Because in this incident, an innocent bystander was killed because of their argument with somebody else. If they would tell us who it is and testify, we could put somebody away and nobody else would have to be hurt by that individual. As long as these individuals are having issues with each other and keep shooting at each other, there's a possibility somebody else innocent is going to get hurt.
And as they continue to wait for answers, McCrae says she will continue to pray there is accountability.
My son is in the dirt while they're walking free. And they know. The guys in the car, they know. It's like they're supposed to be his friends. Y'all say y'all his friends. He always try to help y'all. So why not tell the truth?
If you know who killed Emanuel Lewis, you can call in anonymously to the Columbia County Crime Stoppers at the number on your screen. Katie Jefferies, First Coast News, on your side. Inspector John Zagar retired around a year ago, but when the Putnam County Sheriff Gator DeLoach asked if he would come back to re-examine a cold case, he said yes. So he has been going through boxes of thousands of pages of notes, working to uncover who was behind the brutal murders of Stephen Stroud and Donna Hunter. Page by page, a tragic story unfolds.
That evening, someone went in and just massacred them.
Detailing the murders of 24-year-old Stephen Stroud and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Donna Hunter. It was December 10th, 1991. The couple was living in their home on Coolwater Avenue in San Mateo. Investigator Zagar says he believes the couple knew their attackers because there was no forced entry.
They came to the door. Stephen was shot right in the living room. And then it appears that Donna, who had come out of the back bedroom, was trying to get back out of there when she was shot, and there's a trail of blood where she's going back, trying to get back into the bedroom.
Both shot by a .22 caliber pistol. The exact time of the murder is unknown, but around 11:30 that night, Zagar says two friends went by the house, and when no one answered the door, one looked through a window and saw the terrible scene. Stephen was dead. Donna was still alive, but barely.
One of the individuals went over to Donna and held her. She did not say a word. She just looked at him.
She died on the way to the hospital in Jacksonville. Zagar believes that Stephen was the target. He says he owed money for drugs, and Donna's death was essentially collateral damage. Donna's older sister, Tina Griffey, says despite the fact that drugs are involved, she doesn't want that to define who they were.
So many people were just torn up and still are to this day about this whole situation.
She says her younger sister was quiet but well-liked and had a lot of friends. And Stephen was intelligent and planning to go to college to pursue being a pharmacist.
He was well-liked by many, very, very, very much so. You know, he played sports in high school, baseball.
Which is why their murders shocked the community in 1991. And from the beginning, there has been talk.
Since the day it happened, yeah.
Griffey has her suspicions about who was behind the murders, and so does investigator Zagar. He says he has a person of interest in mind and believes there were two people involved, and he is looking to speak with those who may know more than what they told deputies 3 decades ago.
People know what happened. There's no question that there are people in South Putnam who know what happened.
And turn the page towards justice.
It's time for closure on this case.
If you have any information about the murders of Stephen Stroud or Donna Hunter, you can call Inspector Zagar directly at the number here on your screen. Katie Jefferies, First Coast News, on your side. His name is still well known around the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office for his works as a detective and the fact that his case remains open. Detective Lonnie Miller. And despite the decades that have gone by, his son says he is still faithful that his father's case will be solved. Outside the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office sits a monument to Detective Lonnie Miller. A local park on the northwest side also bears his name. But what investigators and Detective Miller's son truly want are answers.
It's just that little piece of information that will solve a 28-year-old case.
Detective Travis Oliver with the Cold Case Unit at JSO has been going back over this case for the last year.
What has made this case difficult is the lack of a lot of physical evidence and eyewitnesses.
It was May 6, 1995, around 11:30 that night. Detective Miller was responding to a business alarm at Pearl and Basswood Streets. He and patrol officers investigated, and it turned out to be a false alarm, so the patrol cars left. Miller stayed behind talking to the business's owner, Abdullah Shaw. According to reports, Shaw told investigators they talked for about 20 minutes when a black male walked up from behind and said, quote, "Don't move or I'll bust a cap at you." Shaw was shot twice, Miller once in the chest. Shaw told investigators he checked on Miller and he was beyond help, so he left him and drove himself to the hospital. Detective Miller, a 26-year veteran of the force, died at the scene. Detective Oliver says Shaw was able to provide some details about the suspect.
He gave a description of the person, a clothing description, and as much as he could as far as the physical description, but none of the information provided has ever assisted in moving forward within the investigation.
The investigation was extensive. Reports indicate thousands of man-hours were spent working it, from JSO to the FBI to FDLE. And yet, 28 years later, the case remains unsolved. Lonnie Miller Jr. was an officer at the time as well, and says in his 34-year career with JSO, he has wondered if he ever crossed paths with his father's killer.
One time I was arresting a guy, and he didn't notice my name tag, and he said, "I just want you to know I kill you like I killed Lonnie Miller." And I was like, okay. So I called my sergeant. At that time, he said, "Park your car, get out of it, and I'll be there in a moment."
The statement was investigated, but ended up having no validity. But Detective Oliver says this cold case could be heating back up.
Fortunately for us now, we have some people that are beginning to come forward and give information that should have been given 25, 26 years ago at minimum when these people were arrested or had problems with law enforcement.
And the next generation of officers will not forget the detective described as a devout Christian, father, husband, and a man who believed in serving the community.
It's something that we will never let go because it's one of our own, and we just still need the community right now to help us.
And Miller says his family is looking forward to the day they can finally close this case.
We're faithful that it will be solved one day.
If you know anything about the murder of Detective Lonnie Miller, please contact the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office or Crime Stoppers. Katie Jefferies, First Coast News, on your side. Dana Solomon had no way of knowing that a short walk to the gas station would lead to the end of her life. Struck and left on the side of the road, her family says they are frustrated by how little information they have gotten about the investigation over the years. But still, 17 years later, they're not giving up hope. Visiting her sister's grave has become a painful tradition for Heather Spates and family. Cleaning the gravestone, adding trinkets and angels she thinks Dana would have liked, but always in the back of her mind, the uncertainty.
We don't really know the exact circumstances of what happened that night.
The details of November 12, 2006 are as unclear as the dark moonlit night it happened. But what is certain is this is where Dana Solomon's life ended, along Normandy Boulevard.
I don't understand how people can go on, and it feels like our world kind of stopped.
The report from Highway Patrol says just after 7 p.m., Dana Solomon left her home along Normandy Boulevard near Yellow Water Road and began walking west in the eastbound lanes. Heather says she thinks Dana was likely walking towards the gas station nearby to call her family after a fight with her husband, something she had done before. A witness told troopers she saw a vehicle swerve hard towards the center of the road, then back into its lane, and it didn't stop. The witness described the vehicle as a small blue or green pickup with a chrome grille. Then she saw a woman lying in the road. A second witness at a nearby church told a similar story. He too stated he saw a pickup truck strike a woman and keep going. Dana Solomon's husband, Christopher Solomon, is also in the report, saying the two had an argument before she left their home. He told investigators he went out looking for her, and he thought he spotted her walking in the shoulder. He passed her, then turned around at Solomon Road to come back, And that is when he told investigators he saw a vehicle swerve and then other cars stop and put their flashers on. In the road lay 21-year-old Dana Solomon. She was rushed to the hospital and spent a week on life support before she died, leaving behind a little boy to whom she was the world, her 16-month-old son, Landon. He's now 17 and graduated high school last spring. He says he has thought about it over the years, but had to keep moving forward.
I mean, yeah, you think about what it would have been. I mean, I try not to talk about it a lot, but most people know from around here.
Heather Spate says Dana was admittedly a wild child, but she blew family away with how devoted she was as a mother.
To see her change and evolve into the mom and really get her footing into what she wanted to do, she became a massage therapist, and it really kind of made her put her feet planted and start, focusing on where she was going in life and what she wanted for their futures and all of that. So she loved being a mom.
After Dana was struck, the report states her husband's Ford Tempo and several pickup trucks were inspected, but none had damage consistent with a pedestrian collision. The case was closed, only to be reopened if new information becomes available. And in the years since, Spate says she has heard nothing on her sister's case. But she, Landon, and their family hope now is the time someone will finally step up to tell who hit Dana that night and didn't stop.
We have so many questions about the way that night went, what led up to it, the circumstances surrounding it. Our family wants the closure. We want to be able to give my nephew, who I've raised as my son, the closure that I feel like we deserve.
If you know anything about the hit and run that killed Dana Solomon, contact the Florida Highway Patrol or Crime Stoppers. Katie Jefferies, First Coast News, on your side. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to new stories on Unsolved in 2024. Katie Jefferies, First Coast News, on your side.